first and foremost, I suppose, should be a conversation on what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago and what I consider to be the growing authoritarianism of the Trinbagonian government, even potentially inching towards a police state of sorts. So I've spoken about what's been happening in Trinidad in relation to the US and Venezuela in a previous live stream. I also spoke about the attempts to implement this bill, the Zones of Special Operations bill, in my last live stream. This time, I really want to talk about what has happened since and some of the moves that the government has been making, particularly the Prime Minister has been making, to indicate just what direction she's trying to take this country in. Right, so for a bit of context, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, under the United National Congress, which is headed by our current Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, introduced a bill to Parliament known as the Zones of Special Operations Bill. It was basically an effort to criminalize space, to declare entire communities as zones of special operations where constitutional rights were suspended, where police and soldiers would gain special powers to, implement lockdowns and curfews and warrantless searches of people's homes and their persons. And so immediately people were calling this out because it's like, this is a mess. Obviously, we have the bootlickers who are like, yeah, anything to do with the crime problem. And to be fair, the crime problem is a serious issue in Trinidad and Tobago, right? I'm not going to understate that. It's bad. But the government is not the solution. The police is definitely not the solution. The police frequently violate the laws, as they are known to do around the world. They don't know the laws. And with this bill, there was an expectation that, we will police ourselves. We will hold ourselves accountable. We will investigate ourselves of wrongdoing. And the police have been abusing people in this country for decades. Even before this bill was ever in existence, this bill was kind of introduced as a last-minute measure to replace the state of emergency that was established in Trinidad. And for decades, the police have been oppressing civilians, brutalizing civilians, arresting people, and then they're sitting down for years trying to get justice because they were wrongfully arrested. The police have been known to move as a gang, to engage in criminal activity. And so there's no trust in the police, and there should not be, right? Because the police are the abusive arm of the state, and the police do not exist to deal with crime. They exist to protect and serve the interests of the state and the interests of capital. And so with this bill, they would trying to bring these special privileges to the police to enable even more abuse, essentially. It wasn't going to actually deal with inequality or housing issues or lack of opportunities. It wasn't going to get into the wealthy neighborhoods that actually fund a lot of the crime problems, the drug running, the gun running, all those different things. It was an attempt to treat people of an area as suspects and just do whatever they want with them. And now in the bill, they had oversight suggested, right? You had reports and all these different things. Nobody genuinely believes that would have amounted to anything. In a country as corrupt as Trinidad and Tobago, they would have looked into it and absolved themselves of wrongdoing. And so there was a lot of concern among us in the public about how this was going to normalize the abuse, legalize the abuse that has already been taking place, and make future abuses even easier. They had a social transformation committee within the bill itself, but we know what to expect from those kind of things at this point in time. Those are PR moves. They could point to these underfunded projects imposed from the outside and say, oh yeah, well, we're doing something, so you can't really complain, right? But where are most of the resources going? They're going towards the police. They're going towards the not so much the military. Trinidad's military does not get that much funding, but they're going towards the police. They're going towards all these other things. They're going towards lining politicians' pockets with all of their special allowances and tax breaks and all the different things that they're provided simply for being in office. Meanwhile, the unemployment, the lack of opportunities, rising costs, driving the desperation in the country are not being addressed. Right? If you look at the access to mental health services in this country, or the state of the schools in Trinidad and Tobago, or there's so many issues in the country, and this bill was not going to really deal with any of it. Thankfully, although the bill passed in the House, but it failed in the Senate, thankfully. right? So they had an attempt to try and get the bill in, and they were arguing. The opposition, which is led by the People's National Movement right now, the PNM, they were saying that it was going to target people, black people particularly. There's going to be like a racist component to the law, which is valid. And the government's response was that the PNM doesn't want to see any government succeed in reducing crime. By the way, the PNM's hands are not clean. They've done a lot of similar measures. They've been administering the country under worsening crime conditions. And the former prime minister at one point had said, paraphrasing, so don't quote me on this, he said, the rich have to get richer to help the poor. Something along those lines. Right, so they're not absolved of responsibility for the situation. But in their opposition position, they were talking about some of the problems with the bill, some of the low-hanging fruit, I would say. I think there were stronger arguments he made against the bill, that they only got into some of them. But at least from what I saw, the government was making arguments that this would be a way to clean up at-risk communities and stuff. You don't need a bill like this to help those communities. It's not going to help those communities. The government's response to the accusation about the racism charge was that, oh, like all these black men and women would get together and target black people. A lot of black men and women in the TTPS, they have black men and women in the government. So what? This is like neo-colonialism 101, right? You get some of the oppressed involved in the administration of oppression, and they will carry out its whims. This is the level of intelligence I expect from the government at this point. Also, the Tunapuna MP was a big joke, right? That's Roger Alexander. He was saying that Tunapuna, which is an area in Trinidad, is benefiting from the opening of new businesses. I don't know if he's seen businesses all over Trinidad and Tobago are shutting down right now. Right, so the situation is not as hunky-dory as he wants to make it seem. So thankfully, it collapsed in the Senate. It didn't pass. It passed in the House, it didn't pass in the Senate. 8 of the 9 independent senators voted against, and 1 of the independent senators abstained. And of course, the 6 opposition senators also voted against. And a couple things are responsible, I think, for the bill flopping. For one, the independent senators obviously had a crucial role to play, right, in ensuring that it wouldn't pass, because the bill needed a special majority, because, you know, it was going to override parts of the Constitution. One of the things I think was responsible is just the abrasiveness of our Prime Minister, Kamala Persad, who is trying her best to do a Trump impression. She was calling the independent senators brown nosers and bootlickers appointed by President Christine Kangaloo, whom the Prime Minister called a low-level PNM functionary. Right? It's just like insults, bullying, intimidation. That's her approach to governance and her approach to dealing with people in the opposition, especially, right? Mind you, the independent senators weren't even entirely against the bill, as they should have been. They simply suggested certain amendments, right? They wanted certain changes. But as far as Kamala is concerned, she don't want to have to make any changes to the bill. You'll take it so, and if you don't like it, tough. And then she was able to take that and make claims. So after the bill failed in the Senate, she spun around and said that 2 independent senators were trying to solicit personal favors to secure their vote to support the ZOSO bill. She made a serious allegation of corruption in the Senate, that these senators were trying to take a bribe to vote in favor of the bill. Has not revealed who they are. She just said they know who they are. Has not revealed any evidence. Not saying anything. The media is asking other people in her government. Philip Alexander is saying, oh, it's the Prime Minister's story to tell. And story is right. It's a fairy tale. As far as we can tell thus far. She throws out a lie. The media cycle is just chasing after trying to find the truth of the matter. So the opposition and one of the independent senators tries to get the Senate president to send the Prime Minister to the Privileges Committee. The Committee of Privileges is not a concept I'm all too familiar with. I did look it up. And from what I saw, it was a way of kind of introducing complaints regarding breaches of a member's or the House's ability to function, such as contempt or obstruction. It's kind of a way of tackling the exact issue that she created, which is she made this crazy accusation against independent senators without any proof, has everybody in a disarray talking about it, refuses to provide any proof, and it's just, careless. She's been careless, and she's really taken out that Trump playbook in her approach to the situation. And so that is where we find ourselves in. Her bullying, I think, was part of the failure. I think also another thing happened in the country that was responsible for that pressure being there to prevent this bill from passing. And that was the shooting of Joshua Samaru, right? I can't show the video, but this was a guy who the police allege was run away from the police. They haven't provided any evidence of that claim, so you could take it with a grain of salt. But he was quote unquote running away from the police. And we have like this little piece of CCTV footage showing that after his car crashed on the side of the road, the police come out of their vehicles. he puts his window of his car down, puts his hands out, 2 hands out, right, surrendering, and they just unleash bullets into that vehicle. Just 19 bullets, if I remember correctly, into the vehicle. Kills him and cripples his common law wife, Kaya Seeley, who is the mother of his 2 children. They're trying to put all kind of things on his name now. They're trying to claim he was involved in things. His family's saying he was never involved in any crime. And regardless of whether he was involved in crime or not, internationally, hands up means don't shoot. Right? So there was a protest, a gathering in front of the Red House on Sunday. And the Red House is like where the Parliament is in Trinidad and Tobago. There was a gathering on Sunday to talk about the issue. Right? Obviously, with this kind of violence, this kind of police violence, the ZOSO bill was not going to pass. That was a reason, I think, another reason for the bill not passing. Because that happened like right before the Senate bill was supposed to, be passed. While the Senate discussions were going on, if I remember correctly. And the police commissioner decided not to take the police or the police responsible for that shooting off duty. He gave them therapy. He's providing them with therapy right now. The family of Joshua Samaru is not being provided with therapy by the state. But that's to be expected because Kamala has not provided therapy to the families of those that the US has bombed. The 2 Trinidadians who the US has bombed. Who, by the way, shout out to there's a legal group suing United States right now for boat bombing. Like those 2 Trinidadian men. ACLU, shout out to y'all. Much appreciated. As far as I know, by the way, Rishi Samaru and Joshua Samaru are not related. Just a common last name. So it's to be expected that a government would show such a flagrant disregard for the lives of their citizens in international waters, would show a similar disregard for citizens within, its own jurisdiction. So no charges for the police yet. The protest took place on Sunday. Slowly but surely you see a bunch of police just gathering, right? It started as a very small group of about maybe a dozen or so people. The crowd kind of swelled to, I think it got to over 60 people at one point. There was a lot of media there, a lot of interviews, and there was chanting ended up taking place. But while the crowd is building and the interviews are taking place, you're seeing police cars slowing down past protests. And the protest wasn't even on the road, by the way. It was relegated to the sidewalk. But you have a bunch of police cars pulling up. You have a bunch of a police bus, I think, showed up at one point in time. You have these high-ranking police officers coming out to the vehicles and standing on the opposite side of the road watching on the protesters, telling them to stay off the road, all these different things. And then the riot police come. Thankfully, they don't do anything. But it was obvious in that situation that the riot police were there and the police as a whole were there to intimidate the exercise of speech, the exercise of protest against the injustice of this young man who was killed. And the government continues to skirt responsibility, continues to discredit itself, continues to bully and harass and push out misinformation and disinformation to exhaust the public. Because there's always something new every day, every week. It's some new drama. It's by design. But I'm hoping that, as tragic as these situations are, that it wakes up the population to the reality of the state in this country. I hope that with the right communication, we can show that this is not an issue that started with the UNC's governance in April of 2025. These issues have been taking place for many, many, many years. And we can start to develop a consciousness about what we can do about it. ACAB everywhere for real. For real, for real. So that's the situation in Trinidad right now.